Today, as part of our new Ask the Expert series, we are pleased to welcome Chris Shaw, Senior Director at Manhattan Associates. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, how you doing? Nice to be here.
Yeah, man, it's great. I'm excited to have you because when I look at your background, your resume, you are clearly an expert on a subject that we, quite frankly, have been saying for quite a long time now is one of the key foundational pieces of omni-channel retailing, and that is really order management, system design, and implementation. So I think before we get started and we pick your brain on that topic as the quote unquote expert, walk us through your background a little bit. Like, how did you get to the position where we're sitting here interviewing you today? What all have you done?
Yeah, sure. I've been a little bit of a jack of all trades over the last 20 years, but I got my start in the space as an IT person early on, where there was a partnership called return.com back in the early 2000s between FedEx and mailboxes, et cetera, and a little 3PL in Atlanta, Georgia.
Right.
And it was pretty interesting, actually, at the time. The concept was all of these online shopping places were popping up and there was no way to return them. So we built this mechanism where you could come into a mailboxes, et cetera. I don't know if you remember those places.
We totally do. And oh my gosh, my partner Ann and I talk about that all the time.
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, what they became sort of killed our little venture. When you would go in and you would create a return, then you put it into mailbox, et cetera, FedEx would bring it back to the 3PL DC that I was working with, and then we'd get it back, disposition it and get it back. And then somewhere right around the middle of it, right before we launched, UPS came in and bought up all the mailboxes, et cetera, and that sort of put it into our venture. But we were a bit ahead of our time.
Yeah, that idea is like cool again. I mean, Walmart had a big FedEx announcement this week and crazy stuff going on in that space. Okay, so what'd you do next?
Yeah, so we were a little ahead of our time. So then I really kind of doubled down in the 3PL space. I spent a good bit of time as an IT leader there trying to understand it. And one of the things I went out looking for was an order management platform, something because I had so many customers and so many clients, I needed a way to manage all of these orders and all of the inventory coming in and out across multiple enterprises or organizations, because we serviced all kind of customers and I couldn't find one. So I went hunting for one. And when I finally found one, frankly, I liked it so much, I went to work for the company. And so it was a little small company called Yantra at the time. And they really were the sort of the founder of distributed order management. Later, I had worked for IBM. You've heard of IBM Sterling, probably. It's a fairly strong platform in the retail space. And then eventually I ended up here at Manhattan Associates. And along the way, I've done professional services and sales and marketing. And today I spend a whole lot of time working with our product and services teams.
Yeah, and for a lot of our listeners too, because a lot of our listeners, a lot of times, some of these topics they're hearing about for the first time, as well as they're trying to make some of these decisions, at retail companies. Yantra almost has its own kind of legend to it. Like, give us a couple 30 seconds to a minute on that. Like, what is it? What was that whole thing about back then?
Yeah, it was a pretty remarkable company, actually. It was a spinoff out of Infosys.
Okay.
Back in the early 2000s, and these guys just came up with this incredible design pattern for a distributed order management platform. And the best thing about it at the time, we go out and pitch it. And, when I said we were bleeding edge, I mean, we're a little tiny startup and frankly, we bled all over the place, but we had great technology, right? I mean, just great technology. You could go in for a sales deal and just lay the instructions, the manual down on the table. And it was, 100 pages thick of this amazing Java doc with APIs and everything else. And yeah, half your deal was sold because they were so far ahead from a design pattern. Now, where we struggled were the surrounding technologies. We would scale the thing and the database would break, right? We would, so all of the communications technologies, things around it, but it was services-oriented architecture, the precursor of microservices, really what, kind of set the standard. And once they kind of got the kinks worked out and it became recognizable for most retailers that they needed to move into an order management space, it took off, and IBM acquired Sterling, a company called Sterling acquired them first, and IBM acquired them. And yeah, so there's this family of what we call Yantrix that are everywhere, all over the space. And you can find them starting companies, working other places. In fact, the chief technology officer, Sanjeev Siodia at Manhattan Associates, worked with me there. And he did a lot of the design work on the original distributed order management platform there.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And a couple of my favorite people in retail, I think, fall under that definition and moniker too. So it's cool to meet another one. Well, okay, talk a little bit about talk about Manhattan too. So let's talk about, what is Manhattan, your role there, how, what that's all about. And then I really do want to get into a discussion of kind of the historical evolution of order management systems, where they've been and where they're going next. But first, talk a little bit about Manhattan.
Yeah, sure. So Manhattan is a 30-year-old company, publicly traded company, really focuses on commerce and distribution and transportation, really kind of grew up around distribution. Most people probably would know Manhattan as a sort of the warehouse management company,
Right.
sort of pretty big player in that space and have been for a long time. But over the years, really expanded out into transportation management. We have a whole entire product line around demand forecasting, allocation, those kind of inventory planning. And then, of course, we have our newest solutions, which are what we call Omni, but they're really the ones that are sort of closest to the customer. Over the years, we've kind of moved from the backside of the supply chain, closer and closer toward the front end consumer, and that's where you would find all of our order management system, point of sale, customer engagement, digital self-service, and those types of platforms. So really, it's a growth area for us. And we started that in 2017 with the launch of Manhattan Active Omni, which we'll probably talk a little bit more about later in general terms, but it was really a game changer for us because it's 100% microservices, all cloud native SaaS solution. And it really created a foundation for us to be a lot more agile and for us to roll out new features and functions a lot faster for our clients, right? Which are predominantly retailers and some distributors, on that platform. So that's kind of who we are.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I think your background combined with that is going to make for an incredible history lesson in terms of what we're about to talk about, which is really the history of order management. So take us back, okay? And I don't know what year you want to start with this, because sure. I think you could probably almost pick a certain point in time. But like, from your mind, like what is chapter one as order management systems were developing? Where would you kind of put the starting point there for all of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we were really pitching it in 2002, 3, 4, 5, but I would say in the 7, 8, 9 range up to 2010, retailers really started to buy in on this idea that they needed a centralized order management solution that could understand all of their selling channels, right? Because they had different solutions in each channel, whether it was a contact center, whether it was online, whether it was in a store, whether it was in a partner or a distributor. They had more and more they were adding on sales channels, and then on the back, they're having more and more distribution channels. So we think back now, back in 2005, we thought when you had 4 DCs and you were shipping, your digital demand out of 4 DCs, that was very complicated. Like, that was a big deal. And
well, I can remember that. I was at the Gap. We used to distribute like all of our basic denim out of like one warehouse. And then we went to 4 warehouses in like 2002. And it was like the biggest decision of all time. And it was a massive thing to figure out actually for us at the time too. So that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah. And then the funny thing is of course, everything grows, right, in capability. We thought that was pretty complex at the time, but if you look back now, the way we chose between warehouses, like where you're going to ship it from, besides does it have the inventory, was a pretty simplistic waterfall approach, right? How close am I to the customer, and what's the cheapest parcel rate I've negotiated with my 3 carriers who I'm locked into, and I don't ever do another deal with anybody else. And then, you fast forward 15 years and the whole entire dynamic has completely changed. But back then, that was a big deal. And so as they got into that, they said, oh, you know what, I have all this inventory coming in now in different places. I need the ability to make sure I know where it is at all times so that I can start to do, what we call promising, right? And so in the beginning, you did promising in the individual, many retailers still do this, but you do promising in the individual selling platform. So your e-com system has some snapshot that it took of what the inventory looked like, and it's going to do promising from that. And your point of sale system knows about maybe what's in that store, legacy system, and it doesn't know anything else anywhere else, right? So you get these little pockets of inventory visibility. What you normally get is this, global inventory visibility. And I would say from 2007 to 2015-ish, 17, something like that. Okay. That was really sort of the holy grail, right? We all wanted to know where all our inventory was.
Right.
And then it sort of began to evolve, right? Because during that time, as you get into the later half of that period, you started to see the emphasis on fulfillment. Because you talk about back, we had 1 DC.
Yeah.
Well, that was perfectly fine when you're when you just told them, hey, you're going to get it in 5 to 7 days, right? Yeah. Oh, and by the way,
you're making like one promise,
right?
Right. Yeah, you're making like your promises are really simplistic.
That's right.
They're not dynamic. Okay.
Yeah, and at the time, since you were sending out of a DC, you didn't have to worry about inventory accuracy too much because with warehouse management systems, we got up to 99.9% accuracy in the warehouse, so you could trust that system. We'll talk a little bit later about how that becomes a little more difficult when we enable our stores, I'm sure. But what we saw as we kind of got up to what I'll call pre-2017, if you will, right, is digital demand's growing, right? We're starting to see, use that standard slope we saw, pre-COVID, which was every 9 to 12% every year. It's getting bigger and bigger. Now, of course, when you put it next to in-store sales, it was still dwarfed, right?
Right.
But it was growing. And then we had what I'll call sort of the need for speed, if you will, right? So, and Amazon in the US really pushed this, right? Was all of a sudden I'm going to give you free 2-day shipping. And it really just started to change the way retailers had to think about it, right? So now you're working out of 4 DCs or you're working out of 1, but you still have a long way to cover to get that product to the end consumer who has ordered it. And now you're trying to manage and negotiate deals and everything else. So we're starting to see fulfillment become really important, right? It's a driver. People are saying, hey, look, I'm more inclined to buy when it's cheaper or when I can get it faster. So we're starting to see that as an impact. But most of them are still working in the 3 to 5 day or 5 to 7 day, or maybe if you want to expedite it, it's in the 1 to 2 day. They don't have the promising optimization capabilities yet to really match some of the custom work that we see, Amazon doing at the time.
And so stores aren't really part of this equation yet either, right, Chris?
Well,
so as you start to think about them as a node in the network, it's still not really taking hold yet around the timelines you're talking about, right?
Yeah, for sure, not mainstream, right? You definitely have some leaders out there, right? Some sort of vanguards who are out there. I remember Best Buy doing it, trying it a few times a long time ago. But you're totally right. It was not mainstream, and it was not the expectation of the consumer, which I think is probably the most important thing, right? Nobody was saying if you don't have it, you're in trouble, right? We were like, okay, 5 7 days, okay, I'll get it in 5 7 days. And so, but I think the key message to take away from sort of that time period was that fulfillment is a cost consideration for us, right? As retailers and as distributors, somebody they choose what they want, they put it in their cart, they decide to buy, and then they choose when they're going to get it. And then we can, manage that and everything else. So it's still a post-purchase decision or buying decision, related to cost at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you said that too. So like pre-2015, 2017-ish, that time frame, you're really saying like, in the consumer mindset, the expectations were, even though Amazon was coming, the expectations were still pretty basic. And so retailers are really taking that almost as a given. And they're saying, okay, how do I make my order management decisions? Any technology I'm going to invest in to that end, it's really going to be on a cost accounting basis, like really to say, how do I just kind of optimize what I have to save money and get things there as quickly and as fast as possible, versus the other side of the ledger, which I'm sure we'll get to. So then what's chapter 2? Like with that as the backdrop, what happens next?
Yeah. And it's interesting what we're, as I'm thinking about this while we're talking about this, the time frames for our chapters are getting smaller and smaller, right? The progression of
as always,
capability and complexity gets tighter and tighter. That first one was like 10 or 12 years long.
It's like Moore's Law, man.
That's right.
We didn't even know that, right? Yeah. It's always the way it happens. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I would call this almost like the Me Too era, right? So we saw Amazon be, kind of pushing and was like, all right, we're going to, as giant online marketplaces like Amazon start to push this, then you start to see the responses. And in the beginning, right, it's always the big guys who have a lot of custom budget and can spend a ton of money and they mostly build their own stuff. So you got the Walmarts and the Targets of the world. And I think Walmart in particular has done a really phenomenal job of trying to respond to Amazon, right? And really kind of flip the tables. And of course, they got in this arms race for fast and free delivery, right? Like, I can get it in 2 days. Well, I can get it 1 day. Well, you can get it here if you pick it up here. And, and they started to do that. But what happened was, of course, it reset our expectations. So before, in that previous era, you and I, we were like, oh, okay, 3 to 5, 7 days. Now, all of a sudden, because we're consumers of those leaders now, our expectation, every time we have a great experience, our expectation for all retailers goes up. And so now we're in a situation where we're saying, hey, this is something maybe I expect from everybody. And we always talk about Amazon, and certainly this isn't a podcast about Amazon. It's about everybody else who has to deal with that, I think. But they're a huge disruptor, and mostly because they never really had to make any money being a retailer, right? Amazon Web Services, they make money hand over fist, and so
Prime
they,
and all that stuff.
and so I think I saw somewhere, target annual revenue is something like $5 billion range, and in 2019, Amazon spent $40 billion just on shipping. So you can see, right, that they are really pushing that. But what I really loved about
puts the Target.com puts that in comparison. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And so then you get Walmart, who I think really we're sort of the vanguard of saying, hey, you know what? The store network is an advantage, right? I have a physical presence that's closer to the customer. And now we're starting to see the convergence of physical and digital, right? Before it was digital, ship out of DCs, and then it was physical. No, those are the people that like to go into the store. These are the people that like to order online, right? And they were kind of separate. And now we start to see the beginning of this convergence of physical and digital. Well, yeah, I like to shop online, but I want it now. So now the store, if they can make their inventory available and they can do the right promising, maybe they have an advantage now when it comes to that fulfillment time frame, right?
So using the store as either a ship from node in the network, or even as a pickup node in the network.
Yeah, and it started probably as return, right? Like I order online, now you can return to the store. You remember that was sort of like the first phase was you could return to the store. But what we don't really realize as retailer, for the general public, I mean, everybody watching this is going to realize because they're probably all retailers, but most of the systems when they took that in place were all manual, right? They take the thing back from you, but they might not have sold it in that store. They might not have ever stocked it in that store. They don't know how to disposition it in that store. So they just throw it in a bin and then send it back to a DC somewhere, and hopefully somebody takes care of it. But as we move forward, right, we recognize that that's untenable, right? We can't keep moving in that direction. We have to be able to manage things. It doesn't matter anymore. Right now we see it in the term, right now, Omni Channel has arrived, right?
It's in vogue again. Yeah.
Right. So, this idea of Omni Channel has arrived where, as a consumer, my expectation is that I'll talk to you any way I want to talk to you, online, over chat. I'm going to call you on the phone, or I'm going to walk in your store. You should know the same thing about me in every place. You should know my history in every place. And I should be able to see the same inventory in every place based on what I want and get access to it, right? So the expectations now, have gotten a lot higher in this window. And I think the trickle down effect starts, right, for the rest of retail. So everybody else now, it's time to get on board and start thinking about this. And they did, right? Everybody started thinking about it.
Right.
Their horizons may have been different, as far as how fast I'm going to implement it. But at this point, inventory visibility is a given. You better have it, right? It's basic blocking and tackling. And now we start to move into the need for, because I've moved from 4 DCs to 400 stores, right. My ship nodes went from 4 to 404.
Exponential.
So, right. And not only that, of course, none of these places that I just added have ever shipped anything before. They don't have anybody in them that knows how to ship anything. They don't have any systems that were ever built for shipping anything or delivering or picking up or anything. Right. So, right. So you get all these things. And so now I think the next thing that starts to become important at this phase is, if you're going to enable all those stores, how do you know now? Remember that simplistic logic we had before about choosing between the 4 distribution centers? Well, how am I going to choose between 400 and 4, right?
And yeah, exactly. Like what for the audience, like technologically, what pressure points start to emerge, or what starts to need to change, like between this like 2017-ish to, we'll talk pandemic next, but like as you go into pandemic, what systematically that is needing to change to accommodate what you're talking about, so things can work in the right way.
Right. So now you're into this phase of what I'll sort of call, we in Manhattan, we kind of call it sort of the 3 tiers of inventory excellence, right? And so inventory visibility is this first one, right? Because you can't sell anything if you can't see it, right? So number one, I got to be able to see everything, right? So no matter where I'm coming in, I need to be able to see it. But our second tenet really is, just because you see it doesn't mean you should sell it. And so now you have, and I think to answer your question in the most simplistic form, complexity is what has changed, right? DCs, if you're in the distribution center, nobody ever walks up to the guy in the distribution center who's picking things and taps him on the shoulder and says, hey, can you help me? But it happens in the store, right? In the store, you have inbound traffic. You have people coming in. You have to fulfill normal walk-in traffic, and you have to have inventory that is available and reserved for them to do that. Now, certain stores carry more than others. Certain ones have different demand patterns. You have promotions that are going on in different ones. You have staffing levels and capabilities in different ones, right? Yeah. And forget the COVID thing. We haven't got to that yet.
Yeah.
Right. You just in general, all of these different things that I have to contend. So for us, the second phase is really that available to promise page. We call it available to commerce, but that's just our little acronym. The available to promise page, which is, hey, I need dynamic viewing. So if Chris is coming in online and he's doing a search, what inventory is he going to see? What am I going to make available to him based on where he is, who he is, what he's bought, what I have in available, what markdowns I have in certain areas. Now I'm changing what I'm going to show him based on that. Now, of course, if your brother goes in and he logs in, he might see something different because there might be something about him that's different. He might be coming in as a preferred customer. So maybe they've made some changes. He might be coming in from a different region. So they're offering something different. Or he might have called the contact center and the contact center agent has access to more or different. Or he might be walking into the store and that store associate, because they're in the store, they have some special reserve or more reserve. They might have access to more. So anyway, you need a lot of views that can be dynamic and they have to be real time, right? We're in a real time world at this point and nothing else is batch anymore. We're asking in real time. The more of these that we put in place, the more that they're coming in, the more variety that are coming in, the more locations we have to support, the more lookups we have to do, we start to see some performance constraints, right? We're still mostly doing the promising at the cart level and the checkout level right now. So we're still okay, but we're starting to see some of those constraints. And then I think,
So that's an important point though. I want to make sure we click in on that. So yeah, that's interesting because I hadn't thought about that. Like, so yes, at this stage in the historical development of order management, a lot of that promising, quote unquote, so to speak, is really happening inside of the cart. So not quite yet as up in the funnel, but more inside in the cart as you're making that decision at that point. That is key, right?
Yeah, it's super important because we're going to see as we move forward in our timeline that when that changes, it causes us some serious problems, right? Because of the expectations of the consumer.
So let's talk. Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the third phase or the last phase really is the optimization piece. And this is where all the machine learning and the AI and all of the latest, greatest math algorithms that we've been hearing about over the last couple of years comes into play. So now I can see everything. I'm going to limit what I'm going to promise based on however I want to constrain the view, all in real time. And also in real time now, because I have so many stores, I just no longer can do a waterfall approach of, do I have the inventory and which one's closest to the person? Because
if A then B then C then D.
Well, if you're in a region where you are moving, let's say we got the blue sweater, right? I'll call it the blue sweater problem. So the blue sweater is, you've ordered the blue sweater and you're on the system and my promising engine says, well, I can send that from 100 different places. And then you say, well, I need monogramming. And they're like, okay, well, I'm down to 14 places. Oh, and I need it tomorrow. Okay, well, I'm down to 5 places. But how do I choose which of the 5? 5 could actually get it to you on time, what you want, when you want it. Now I need to look at the most cost-effective way for my organization to get it to you. I'm already going to make you a promise. I'm going to get it to you on time, and I got to keep that promise. But now I have multiple ways to get it to you. I'm now going to do a real-time analysis looking at all kinds of factors in and out of the store, in and out of the DC, in my shipping, timeframes, everything else to decide which one I'm going to choose and make sure that I make that selection. And it's really important because it could be that the place that's closest to you is selling that blue sweater as fast as they can put it on the shelf at list price. But 2 states over, they can't even give them away. So I'd rather pay the extra $1.20 to get it from the other location, which normally in our traditional one, we never would have selected that, right? Because it wouldn't have matched the waterfall approach. But now I'm saying I'm going to use a much stronger algorithm for me to understand the real value and the real cost of the business. So that's kind of where we are now as we in the era heading into 2019.
And what makes that so hard technologically too? Because like there's probably some people like, oh, it just sounds like an algorithm. You just put it in, the engineered nerds behind the scenes just kind of make it happen. But you actually have to have different system design for this, right? Like it's got to be working real time. Is it cloud based? Like what are the things that actually make that function one thing on top of the other, like you described, so quickly and so fast?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 levels. And we'll probably talk about another level in a minute when we talk about the speed element that gets added with,
okay,
with
well, maybe,
COVID,
yeah.
right? But in this particular case, absolutely cloud is the foundation, right? I think being a SaaS application with rapid access to inputs and data from all over the place in real time is sort of the baseline. It's really difficult to do it with legacy systems where you're bolting on stuff and adding on things and putting them in place. Frankly, we tried that for a number of years, right? It wasn't until 2017 we realized, we got a great order management system functionally, but our clients are going here and we can't get this system here. So we needed to do something different to get them where they need to be. And I think from a core fundamental standpoint, you have to be running in the cloud as a cloud native solution.
And that was one of the key points I want to get across, because I've been writing that for, I think, the past 3 years, is there's just that latency effect in what you're doing if you're not doing it this way, and that's going to be inherently problematic. And I think we're seeing that now exacerbated by the pandemic. So pandemic happens, now how are things changing? How is what we're talking about evolving?
Yeah. So I'll put it in the context of just 2019 versus 2020 then, right?
Okay.
See that. So as we went into 2019, we during 2019 and the holiday 2019 season, we saw store-based fulfillment starting to become mainstream. Now, people were doing it at different levels, but they were doing it a pretty significant amount. I think for us, we saw buy online, pick up store. So BOPUS, curbside, lockers, people starting to use lockers, same day courier, we're starting to see fracturing of the ways you can get your product. So not only have we now fractured the number of locations that you're going to get your product, we're now fracturing by location the number of ways we can get it to you, right? In different locations. So again, piling on complexity, right? We talked about before, in a system that's, for the most part, probably already somewhat strained at this point. But in holiday 2019, we saw from our clients a significant portion of them now doing more than 50% of their total digital fulfillment volume out of their stores. And so that was a pretty significant jump for some of them, but they were still sort of the leaders or the vanguards, I think, in the space. And as you say, it wasn't really until February, March of 2020, and definitely into April, that we really start to essentially put gasoline on the fire, right? So we've been talking all along, right? There's been trending. So we had the trends were there, people were going there, but I'm going to go there in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, 4 years.
Right.
And then in a matter of, 4 weeks, people had to go there now. And I think that was the real change, right? The skyrocketing speed with which all of this came to fruition, because all of a sudden the stores were gone. You couldn't go into the store anymore.
And is the match really that lit the gasoline? Is it really this? I mean, to me, it feels like it's this expectation around, like, you know what, now I can just have everything same day. And like you said, there's all these options for me to get it same day. It could be shipped from store, pick up on the curb. It could be a third-party service. But I, as a consumer, have that expectation. And now, retailer, I kind of expect you, and really because I have no other choice when safety is a top concern, I really expect you to figure out how to make that happen. I mean, is that fundamentally all that it comes down to in terms of, what's ignited that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what we learned over 2020. So, when we started, everybody was really patient, right? Like we were all like everybody's freaked out a little bit, right? And so we're all really patient. We knew everybody was adjusting. If we had to wait a long time, that was okay. If we had to drive up in front and call you on the phone and you come out, we're okay with that. By the time we got to like August, we weren't okay with that anymore, right? Our expectations changed. And what you said there, I think, is the most fundamental change we've talked about the entire time for retailers. It's one thing to be able to deliver on all of this and to be able to put it in place and make sure that you have the systems in place to do it. But something fundamentally changed with consumers during the 2020 cycle. And you could tell it was already brewing in 2019 and 2018, but it really changed in 2020. And that was essentially the move from fulfillment activity being a decision or a cost add-on and consideration post-purchase to being a buying decision before I made the purchase. So all of a sudden, that blue sweater, I need it blue and I want it in size large and I want it monogrammed, but I also want you to tell me when you can get it to me and how I can get it. Because if you can't tell me that way up front before I even put it in the cart now, I'm going somewhere else that will.
Yeah, it's all got to show up in the front. So technologically, what does that mean? Because to me, I mean, that sounds like it means you've got to have a great back end design, but you've also got to really understand front end in terms of how you bring this to life, in terms of what consumers are expecting to see against the logic that you're going to promise behind the scenes.
Yeah. So you can't, So essentially a couple of things are happening right now at this point, right? We just mentioned that the volumes are skyrocketing. So to set the framework for this kind of promising that we're talking about now, you had some stores that were doing, I don't know, 15 or 20 orders a day, small, kind of getting going out of their stores. And now they're doing 300 plus a day. When you're doing 15 or 20 orders a day, you can use workarounds. You can use manual stuff. You can figure it out. If you're doing 300 a day, you better have DC quality pick, pack, ship, and inventory management capabilities in the store. And frankly, most retailers who weren't already on the path were kind of caught flat-footed, right? Because they have a traditional point of sale system, which is great for selling to someone who's walking in the store, but has no context or basis for a digital order coming in, a person driving up to the front of the store, you having to pick the item and communicate with them digitally and get it into their car and never talk to them, face-to-face. It's contactless commerce that sort of emerged. The volumes now have really stressed the store. So now you're gonna digital volume is exploding. Everything's in place. You're already having trouble making promises because of all the complexity we've added. And now we have what you just talked about, which is we've added all this volume up front. We no longer are going to make one call per buying cycle because someone is in the cart, and then we're going to make one call for a 5-day or 5 to 7 day, or even if we had an optimized one, we're making one call. We now have thousands of people on the site. We have potentially hundreds of locations we can ship from. We have tens of thousands of items potentially in our catalog that people are buying and ordering from, and they're all doing it at the exact same time. And now all that promising logic that was left to the end is now having to happen up front because we got to give them at the same time we're giving them size and color. So all of a sudden the volume is exponentially higher for your digital systems to be able to make the promising. But the consumer isn't changing their expectation for the promise. If you promise me something, you better deliver on the promise. So now we start to run into true technical issues with the platform itself. And really it starts with the relational database systems, right? Okay. The model of those systems. They were designed, and we were using them back in Yontra. I mean, it's the same design pattern. We were using them in 2002, and they broke then when we scaled it. Right. So now it's just untenable, and they're not capable of doing it. And so we began to recognize this, in Manhattan and doing a lot of research on it back in 2019. We already were recognizing that, hey, if the volumes start to keep growing like this, of course, we had no idea COVID would come, but if they keep growing like this in the next couple of years, we're going to have some retailers out there who are really stressing the system, and they're going to start to get, record locks and contentions and other issues, and they're going to start breaking the database. How can this thing be reorganized and redesigned? And the way we did it essentially is we used a hyper caching in-memory system. So all of the inventory for the entire organization is now housed in memory. Now, of course, there are still relational systems to write to so that you can have long-term storage, but you just shift everything into this hyper caching system. And all of a sudden you just unlock instantaneous promising and the ability to not have to reduce any of that real-time exhaustive optimization logic that we already talked about. It's still happening. It's just now happening at an exponentially faster pace because you're getting exponentially higher requests for it.
Yeah, or not have to rely on even just kind of like the bolt-on systems you've got now for the last 6 months, which is my fear, which I think a lot of retailers are probably still kind of just muscling through this at all levels to compensate for technology, to compensate for in-store processes, whatever. That's going to, I think, become a real question for a lot of them. I'm curious, like as you look at the market, I mean, you talked about the big guys really, kind of being on the front end of this, the Targets, the Walmarts, but, there's so many other players out there, say, $1 billion and above as an example that just don't have the resources to do that on their own. But yet this is a fundamental problem now because the consumer has shifted to the degree that we've talked about. Like, how do you think about that question into relation to what they have in front of them? Like, what are your thoughts as an expert on how to go about looking at that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot if you try to think about it all at once and try and figure out how do I get there from here. So I think you have to break it down. And I think the easiest way to do it is to break it into sort of a functional bucket and a technical bucket. Okay. From a functional bucket, I think let's focus on centralized promising first. Do I have that inventory visibility? Do I have the ability to change the views and see what I need to see so I can make a good promise? Do I have the ability to optimize after I've made the promise to make sure that I'm, that sort of the second level is getting the best cost value for my company once I make that decision. So, and then the third one is the one we just talked about, and that's acceleration of promising, right? So don't try to bite off all of it at once. you can go in chunks and do it. You can grow into it.
And they stage that way, like it ladders like that, Chris?
It depends.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on the platform you're going to look at and the solution you're going to look at. I would say, regardless of what choice they make from a software platform, from a vendor selection, make sure that they can get to those three things. Now, they may be able to get all three at once, right? Depending on how they move to the platform. But most retailers, most retail organizations don't have the luxury of doing a complete big bang move for all their systems. And so they're going to have to add and deprecate and add and deprecate. So they want a future system that's going to allow them to be able to extend and use existing legacy technology and then deprecate it when they need to bring in a new one. And that really kind of leads us to the technical side of it, which is invest in a future system. Invest in systems that are designed and built to be run natively in the cloud. So cloud native architectures, 100% microservices, make sure they're extensible. And if all of those are in place, they should never need upgrading. So you should be able to get innovation on a regular basis that you can choose to take when you want, because it's just delivered on a monthly or quarterly basis that's coming all the time. And the advantage of that, really, if you put all those pieces together, and probably the most important thing for any retailer in 2020 and beyond, is agility, the ability for them to adapt and adjust. Think about it. When your stores get shut down, you need the ability to pivot and do something different so that you don't strand that inventory. And you may even have situations, we've had in situations where the same exact retail chain, let's say it was 100 stores, some stores are closed down all the way, some are halfway closed down, some are wide open. And your system needs to be able to adapt and manage that and help those take advantage of the inventory that's in those locations and turn on alternative choices like ship from store, curbside, pick up in store, and enable those pieces. And we had some retailers who had already moved in that direction, right? They were already invested in the future system. They weren't there yet from all the functional standpoints. And they were able to turn on some of these functions in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to be able to get them back up to speed and take advantage of that so that they didn't miss that. But it was because they were investing in the core infrastructure that gave them the agility to do that.
Yeah, they had the architecture that enabled them to do that. Well, that's a good segue too, because my last question was going to be this, because we talked about history. And, we're starting on 2021 here. Let's do a little prognostication then. What's the next chapter? Like, where does this go next? So you talk about people needing to set everything up in that manner. What's coming next that they need to be prepared for so that they can kind of marshal the resources and move in that direction when it comes?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, you want to put on the Johnny Carnac.
You should, yeah. Like, what's
if I knew how to predict it, I would be probably out in Vegas or something doing something different. But I think in general, when you look forward, the fact that you can't predict it is the important part. If someone had mentioned to you last year, hey, you need to be ready for contactless curbside pickup next year, you would have said, well, what's the point? Why? Why wouldn't I want to talk to the person? In fact, when they get to the store, I want them to come in so that I can sell them something else, right? We wouldn't even have planned for that. And that showed up, and, we had to adjust and we had to adapt. So there will be something coming next that we haven't anticipated yet, which gets back to that sort of that agility piece. You have to be ready for whatever comes next. Yeah. But I think the one thing I would take away from where we are now is it's not going back. Mm-hmm. Yes, if we have a successful rollout of the vaccines, should be awesome. It should really help us as a worldwide economy get sort of back on our feet and moving again. But we have made so many strides and so many people have moved so much farther digitally and with this expectation of Omni Channel that there's no going back. So retailers need to know that this is moving in a forward direction. It's not going to be something that just kind of falls back to where we were before.
Well, the thing you get me wondering about too is especially as I start thinking about this competitively and you start taking the strategic, mindset of an executive, is I start to wonder as you think about the Amazons, the Walmarts, Targets, Best Buys, et cetera, all the big guys who have, started thinking this way, do they start to get to the point too where they can start to shape the demand curve with the mindset being, in such a state right now that same day is such an important thing? Can I start to shape the revenue side of where all of this comes from by being smart in how I, calibrate my promotional and marketing strategies against this system design? I mean, am I crazy to think about that, or is that also potentially where this is all going?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think the more data we have, the more information we have, and the faster we have it, the more real time we can make those adjustments. So maybe promotions, take on a whole nother level, right? Because we can take in all this data, including fulfillment activity, and pickup activity and delivery activity and put it into the front end. So I absolutely think that they'll continue to push forward. And I think, as I said before, right, the expectation isn't just when I go into a mega retailer that I'm going to get this level of service. It's when I shop, this is what I expect.
Yeah, what you get me thinking about it, and this is probably a good segue too in terms of the how millennial are you section, but it gets me thinking about, okay, like how are you serving that same kind of front of the funnel information in social media? When you see something and you're captivated, boom, right then and there, like how is that all working? And the retailers that understand that are probably going to be the ones that win. And so it just gives more credence to everything we're talking about. All right, man, well, let's shift gears. I'm excited for this. It's going to be a blast. All right, question for you. If you have the option, say you're in a grocery store pre or maybe even during the pandemic, but maybe pre, are you pulling out your mobile wallet like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, or are you paying with cash, credit card? Like what's the traditional way Chris Shaw is shopping in store?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately I almost always default back to the old analog card. I don't know if it's just
Are
habit.
you still?
Yeah,
Really?
I mean, I have all those things. I have Apple Pay and Walmart Pay, and Target, all those things, and I've used them. And I use them a lot of times just to see how well they work, and all of the pieces that go along with being in this industry. But I guess I would say I use Apple Pay more than anything else if I'm paying, but I can't remember the last time in a grocery store I used it. I almost always pull out the card still, so I guess I'm not very millennial.
That is amazing. The guy who just gave us a history lesson on order management systems and microservices and design is pulling out the credit card. Yeah, you're not the only one that's ever answered that way. That's why we do this. It's fun to see the trends. All right, in the last week, how many times have you ordered food or drinks via a mobile app?
Unfortunately, my family goes to Chick-fil-A a ridiculous amount of time, and they have a phenomenal app, and I use it every single time. So I would say about 4 or 5 times this week, in the past week, we have bought with the Chick-fil-A app.
Oh my God, all from Chick-fil-A. That's so funny. It's so funny you said that. Just this morning, I was looking back at who I named best Omni Channel retailer of 2019, and I picked Chick-fil-A for that very reason. Their app is stellar. All right, if you could only live with one social media platform, what would it be and why? I have no idea which way you're going to go with this.
This is going to be another one of those, you're definitely not millennial. For me, it's Facebook. And the reason is because I used to love those online forums, right? Because let's say you're into cars or you're into, video or photography or whatever, and you go to these forums and there's always experts in there and everything else. They've all kind of vanished. And the only place I can find them are Facebook groups. So I do spend an inordinate amount of time in Facebook groups. So my kids would tell me that makes me definitely not millennial, but that's my place.
So that also means you were like an online chat guy before. Is that what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I go way back to the BBS on the dial-up boards, right? From back to being in high school and in my first years in college.
Oh my gosh. All right. That is fantastic. So good. We have never heard that one before. We've never heard that one, but that would be my choice too, would be Facebook for sure. 100%. So I'm right there with you on that. Well, hey man, that was a ton of fun. I really, really enjoyed that conversation because I think it's a different angle that we take to the show too, in terms of like trying to really get to the root of like what everything is about that's going on, and how do we need to think about it and put it in the proper context. And I thought you did a great job of that today. So like, if people want to learn more about Manhattan Associates, if they just want to get in touch with you, like what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you certainly could find me on LinkedIn. You can go to manh.com, or you can just email me at cshaw@manh.com. We'll get to you in one of those ways.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks so much for doing this. The other joke I always have with Chris is that he sounds exactly like Dan Patrick. If those of you that are familiar know who that is, whenever I talk to him. So hopefully that's coming through loud and clear on the interview. But hey, again, Chris Shaw from Manhattan Associates. Thank you so much for being with us, Chris. And to all of you that are listening out there, I say it every time. It's important as we start this new year. Be careful out there.